We're going to talk a lot about the Philistines. So let's do a little backgrounder here. The Philistines were originally from Mitzrayim, or Egypt. We learned that from Deuteronomy 2 and Genesis 10. Many people are confused by that. They say they came from Crete. They are recorded by Tacitus and others of coming from Kaftor, which was originally the northern delta of the Nile, interestingly enough, from which even the Phoenicians emigrate to the Middle East. But Crete was an intermediate resting place and gave rise to the legends as to their source. They settled in Palestine in Abraham's time. That's in Genesis 21 and 26. They are detailed there. Philistine means immigrants. That's what the term originally meant in Ethiopic Phalasha. In the Hebrew, Palash means to wander, the wandering ones. Centuries later, the Romans will name this region after the Philistines. In Latin, that's Palestina. And they deliberately named it that to try to erase any memory of Jewish presence. And that goes back to the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Christian era. When you use the term Palestine, you're using a label that was deliberately put on the region in a vain attempt to eradicate the rightful place of Israel in the land. And thanks to the British, the Romans almost succeeded. But we live in an era where that is, I hope, sensitive. If you use the term West Bank or Palestine, you're using language of the enemies. It's called Judea and so on. By the time we get even to the Exodus out of Egypt, the Philistines had become very formidable. We find them referred to in Exodus 13 and 15 and elsewhere. They advanced north along the coast, all the way from the river Egypt, in Egypt, of course, to Ekron, which is the northernmost of the 5 famed cities. Each city of the Philistines had a lord or a leader over it. This confederacy of 5 cities, Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, and Gath, and Ekron, are frequently in the scripture, not the least of which there's a very colorful episode in 1 Samuel 4, where they managed to capture the Ark of the Covenant, much to their dismay, it turns out. It's one of those humorous passages in the scripture. And I was tempted to jump into that full force just because of the humor of it all. But if we have time at the end, we'll double back on that because it's incidental to our thing here. They spoke a different language from Hebrew, and they sold the Israelites, many of them, into slavery, to both Edom, to the southeast, and to Greece, obviously in the way extreme northwest. They were very proficient in smelting iron. So that was the advanced technology in weaponry. The iron chariots and the iron spears and things was a major advantage. And one of the things they did as they gained dominance in Israel is to outlaw all workers in iron. All smiths or ironmongers, however you want to label them, were outlawed. We find that even in 1 Samuel 12. We're going to discover that Samson, all he did is really harass them. He prevented them, perhaps, from becoming stronger. But he doesn't overcome the Philistines, not really. That will fall upon Saul and David and following. When the monarchy rises, things do get better. They sometimes used to burn their prisoners alive. And we'll find an example of that in the next chapter. I should say next evening in chapter 15. There are threats of that are material in the chapters that we're going to be looking at tonight. And they're alluded to in the Psalms and elsewhere. The region they're in is called the Shephelah. It's an undulating plain, about 32 miles long, about 9 to 16 miles wide. It rises a few hundred feet above sea level. Then in the east, it rises sometimes as high as 1,200 and then drops down to the valley, a very deep descent into a valley. And then across this valley, the hill country begins. That kind of flat plain is tremendously advantageous to chariots in contrast to the mountains. So that gives them a major, major technological edge, if you will. The region is very famed for fertility and grain, vines and olives. Some of the most fruitful wines come from the Sorek Valley, which will be the scene of some important events in our session tonight. And it's also a refuge in the times of famine and 2 Kings elsewhere. This whole area is a commercial thoroughfare between Phoenicia to the north and Syria to the north and Egypt and Arabia southward. And Ashdod and Gaza are two cities that really are the gateway, if you will, to this powerful empire to the south and to the, well, I should say southwest.